Hi, this is Jeff Blauette, Technical Agronomist for Cooperative Farmers Elevator. And on this week's Field Friday segment, I thought we'd talk about probably the main topic of interest right now, and that's what's this cold frost type weather going to do to our crop that's emerged. So if we look at what we've got, we started planting pretty hard that week of the 20th of April. We've got some corn emerged, of course. We look at what we've got for size of this plant, so let's take a look at some of the size of the corn row that's up. So you can see here we've got corn that's been emerged for a little bit here. We've got it just poking through here nice. One or two leaves have kind of showing up there, but really basically you'd call this just emerged corn. So what's that going to look like? We get a frost here or a couple of frosts the next few days with corn this size. That tissue that's above ground could get nipped. We've got a chance of that getting frozen, maybe just the tips, maybe everything above ground, depending on how cold it gets for how long. The risk of that is our growing point on corn, they always say, is below ground till V4, V5, which is great. That'll protect it from mortality if we get froze. But I do have some fear if we have some of the tissue damage that could happen, and that tissue that gets frozen just kind of collapses, it's just dead, and it ends up being dry and twisted after a few days. And if that struggles for that new seed or that new growth to emerge out of that whorl, that can delay growth a little bit, and that's not what we want. So that would probably be my biggest fear on this corn, is will that new growth be able to emerge through that dead tissue very well? If it does, fine, there's probably not really any ramifications. If it does struggle on some of the plants, it could make that corn plant uneven a little bit, and that's a fear I have when it comes to, we spend a lot of time and money on our planters and our tillage to get every plant to emerge within the same 24 hours to get it even all the way through the season. Well, if we have some plants that are damaged enough where it delays some of the plants and not all of them the same, that isn't what we want, but I guess it's what we're going to have to evaluate. We got to wait probably 4 or 5 days afterwards to get some decent growing weather to really evaluate what really the long-term effects are. But I don't expect any conditions right now, at least with the forecast, where we're going to actually kill any corn. We also have a few soybeans that were planted quite early that could be emerged. I'm out here in our Elvord hub plant plot. We actually have our soybean planting date and population trial here this year. We no-tilled some soybeans here on the 21st of April, so let's take a look at what they're looking like right now. Here you can kind of see we've got beans that are just peeking through. So you can see these beans, they're emerged. The cotyledons are just poking through. A percentage of the plants are emerged. There's a few that are just trying to crack through yet, but it's pretty slow. Not much has happened this week with the cool weather. But so what about soybeans in this frost? Soybeans, the growing point is actually above ground. Once we get to that emerged time frame, they're not protected in the soil anymore. So if we get those froze off, they are dead. The good thing with soybeans, though, is that tissue is much more succulent, much thicker. Those cotyledons are thick, lots of tissue there that has to freeze to kill it. And the stems below that are generally pretty succulent, so they're not as thin and flimsy, you might say, as that newly emerged corn leaf. But if we look at what we're looking at here, a lot of that stuff's really close to the ground. So with any frost conditions or any weather temperature conditions, the closer to the ground it is, the better, so it's really small. We've got damp ground in general. Damp ground is less likely to move temperature-wise or get affected as opposed to dry soils, so that's in our favor. So we'll just have to kind of see what things do, but we do have some soybeans emerged on some of this very early planting, but I'm not terribly concerned if we only get down to 30 or 29 degrees for an hour or two. If we get some low-lying areas that are cooler than that for much length of time, we're going to have to see once what the new growth looks like after 4 or 5 days again. But that's kind of what I would expect to see and what our risks are with this crop. So I guess we'll have to see once what we do get for how cold and for how long, and see what happens. Hopefully we don't damage this early planting stand that we have that looks so good right now, but we'll have to wait and see. That's this week's Field Friday segment, and we'll see you next week.